So I'm going to tell the Siam story, the chief story. And in our community, what we call a chief is the head of a family. And so they have responsibilities. They can share with you who you could marry, when you could fish in their territory, on their family land or at their fish weir. The chief was someone that spoke in ceremony on behalf of his whole family. And sometimes some families had hundreds and hundreds of people in that one family. And so it was such an important role. And technically it would go to the oldest male, but that wasn't always the case. They would go with who was worthy of it, that chieftainship, that Siam. And so at this time, there was a man, he was elderly, he was getting old, and he was saying that, it was getting time that he needed to pass his chieftainship to one of his children, and he had 3 children. He had a daughter who was 20 years old, and she was a master carver. That was her gift that she had. And they had an 18-year-old son, the middle boy, and he was a master hunter. He was a really hunter for his family. That's what his job was. And then he had a little boy who was just 4 years old, and he was 4 years old. But as you can see, in our community, right from birth, you were equipped with knowing how to survive on your own. So you know how to make clothing, you knew how to hunt for food, you knew how to gather for yourself. And so even at 4 years old, that child was raised to know how to look after himself out on the land. And so one day at a big ceremony, the Siam, he stood up and he told his family that he wanted to pass his chieftainship on. And all right away, the 18-year-old son's like, I'm gonna be the chief, I'm gonna be the chief, I'm the oldest male. And the Siam said, I want to have an equal opportunity for all 3 of my children to become the chief. He goes, I'm going to set my kids out onto the land for however long it takes them, but I want them to come back and bring a gift for our community, our family. And as a family, we are going to decide together who the next Siam is going to be. So the next morning, the 18-year-old son, he respected his dad's wishes. He said, I'll honor them. And I'm gonna, he said he'd humbly get it the way he goes, I'm gonna bring home the best gift. And so they went out the next morning. It was dead of winter, by the way. And even though, there was like 3 feet of snow, that 4-year-old, he went in his own direction. He didn't go with his siblings. They all spread out. They went in different directions, and they went out onto the land. Well, a whole year had gone by, and the oldest daughter came home. And she came home with so much things made out of that she carved herself. She made big ocean-going canoes, and she put all the other stuff that she carved in those canoes to cargo them back to her community. And the community all welcomed her on the beach, and they welcomed her home. And they're like, wow, there's so many things here. There was those planks for the longhouses, so it helped with our actual houses. She had ceremonial masks for her family. We're from the wolf clan, and so she would have big wolf masks and stuff for her family. And so that was part of the religious part of it. So through our ceremony, the transportation, the housing, and they said, wow, these are so many wonderful gifts that she brought back to us. She goes, we want the girl to be the chief. We want the girl to be the chief. Well, the Siam, he stood up and he said, we have to wait for my 2 other children to come back with their gifts. But in the meantime, we're going to spread out all these gifts amongst our family, and we can utilize those gifts. So we thank our daughter for bringing those wonderful gifts to us. And then once all 3 are back, that's when we'll decide who the chief's going to be. Well, another year went by, and the boy came home, the older boy. So he's 20 years old now, and he came home. And remember, he was a master hunter, so he brought tons of furs, from some grizzly bear furs, bear grease. He brought so many things for clothing for our people. He provided food. He dried all the meat and brought it all home. so the people could eat and they wouldn't be hungry for many years. There was so much meat that he brought back. And even the bones that he got from the animals, he made tools and weapons. And so they were like, the whole community was gathered and they were like, we want the older boy to be the chief. And there's so many cool things, we won't have to hunt for how long. And again, the Siam stood up and he said, we're going to wait for my youngest son to be back. And some people were laughing, saying, he was only 4 and he left. He probably not even made it through that winter. And the mother stood up and she said, I believe in my heart that he's okay. He's out there, I know he is, and we need to wait for him. And so the Siam said, but in the meantime, we're gonna spread all the meat, the furs, all the tools and weapons with all our family equally and enjoy those things. But we need to wait for my youngest son to come home. And 2 more years went by. So how old's the boy? He's 8 now. And one day, the kids were all playing on the beach. And in the distance, just around the point, they saw a canoe. And they saw a boy on that canoe. And so the people were rejoicing like, we think it's the Siam's son that's finally returned to us. As he got a little closer, he had another canoe he was towing. And as soon as they got back, the whole community lifted both canoes up and they carried them. And they were like, we're finally gonna pick who our new Siam's gonna be. And some people were kind of nosy and they wanted to look into the other canoe because they couldn't see anything there. And people were starting to laugh because what they did see in the canoe was just water, sand, and rocks. And they're like, he brought his own little water play station home. And they were like, didn't understand what was in the other canoe. And so the Siam stood up and said, please, he said, we have to wait and let my son explain what his gift is to us. And so the little boy stood up and he said, I went to a neighboring village. They took me in. He goes, I walked many days to get there. And when I got there, they welcomed me into their community. And they had something that we don't have here in our waters. And he goes, but they taught me how to cultivate it. They taught me how to preserve it, to make sure that they still come back. And that, we could utilize this in our waters. And so he went to the bottom of his canoe under the sand and rocks, and he pulled out salmon eggs. And he said, if we put this in our water with these rocks, the scent, they'll grow up, they'll go out to the sea, and they'll come back. And we can fish for just a few, not a lot. And when we eat the fish, we put the bones back into the water, and they will come back, they'll return to us. He goes, but I'm gonna teach you how to smoke the fish, to dry the fish. There's many ways to cook it. And if we look after it right, I'm teaching you some salmon songs and to pray for our salmon to return to us. He goes, this is my gift to the people. So who became the chief? That boy ended up being the salmon chief. And we still survive as a huge staple for us today as Squamish people. The salmon is very important to our whole way of life. And then we say stohwe is the fish in our language. And so that boy was one of renowned chiefs of our day. There's always morals behind the stories, and I would like to talk about this for a second. We always were like apprentices. When you're hunting, you're carving, you followed the carvers around. And remember that girl, the oldest girl, she carved all these things for them, and they just got those things given to them. Do you think the community looked after those things? It was just given to them, right? And then all those children that were apprenticing under the carvers, were they carving? There was years of people not carving because it was just given to them. And so there was a lot of kids that weren't learning at that time about carving. And then the boy who was a hunter as well, the food was given to them. And it went through really fast and stuff. And the same with the furs, people weren't learning how to make the grease. and that was to waterproof their clothing. There was so many teachings that were kind of getting lost. But for the youngest boy, he didn't just give him the fish. He said, this is what you need to do to look after it, what you need to do to preserve it, how it comes back to us all the time. And he just didn't hand that to them. They had to work for it. And so he put everybody, on that challenge. And we still eat fish today, and it's, not everyone carves or hunts as well. And so those are teachings that we have for a lifetime now. We'll see.